Hena Khan is the author of several books, including Amina's Voice, Power Forward, On Point, Bounce Back, It's Ramadan, Curious George, Golden Domes and Silver Lanterns, and The Night of the Moon. She is a Pakistani-American Muslim who was born and raised in Maryland. As a child, she frequently visited the Rockville Library with grocery bags filled with books. Her book, Amina's Voice, which is nominated for a 2018-2019 Maryland Black-Eyed Susan Book Award, is about a girl dealing with family issues and typical challenges for a student starting middle school, but is also a window into the faith, culture, and community of a Pakistani-American Muslim. This book really showed me a different type of culture, presented it in a way that is light tone, and also opened me up to how kind people can be when presented with a disaster. Ms. Khan hopes that reading about Amina and seeing her as a friend will help foster compassion and tolerance among children of all backgrounds and faiths. Ms. Khan also spends time writing and editing for international organizations that work to improve the health and lives of people around the world. Her latest book is Power Forward, part of the Zaid Salim Chasing the Dream series. Karina Yan Glazier is the author of The Beakers of 141st Street and a contributing editor at Book Riot, the largest independent book media company in North America, where she writes the weekly The Kids Are All Right newsletter, as well as children's book recommendation posts. The Beakers are a biracial family with 5 kids and 3 pets residing on 2 floors of a humble red brownstone with a weather vane in Harlem. This book showed me what you can do with the people you love, your family, and also presents what you can do when the things you love are threatened. Additionally, I think it is very cool how within the main story, each character has a different conflict going on. Mrs. Glazier's family moved a lot when she was growing up, and she changed schools 6 times by 6th grade. She says that school libraries were her sanctuary, as she has always found familiar and friendly faces within the bookshelves of school libraries. Like the Beakers, Mrs. Glazier's family has a cat, a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. These pets make fantastic coworkers. As a mother, one of her proudest achievements is raising 2 kids who can't go anywhere without a book. Mrs. Glazier's next book, The Beakers in the Hidden Garden, will be published this September. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Khan and Mrs. Glazier.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and so sorry about the weather conditions. And I just feel terrible. I feel like you should all come sit with us up here on this platform instead of like in the grassy swamp. Well, thank you for joining us. And we had such a great introduction. Thank you so much. And I think we were going to introduce our books a little bit. Do you want to talk a little bit just about the synopsis of your book? Yeah. Okay, so for the Beakers at 141st Street, like our wonderful introduction said, it's about 5 kids living in a brownstone in Harlem, and they just discover that their neighbor, who is also their landlord, is not renewing the lease on their apartment, and they have 5 days to convince him to let them stay. And they do all sorts of things to try to convince him. Some of them are very unsuccessful. And it was a pleasure to write this book, and I'm so glad to be here today.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that we really, really appreciate you coming out in spite of the mud and the rain, and I'm glad it stopped for a minute. I'm here to talk today about Power Forward, which is a brand new book and a new series I'm really excited about called Zaid Salim Chasing the Dream. And this is book 1 of 3 right now, but hopefully more if you guys enjoy it. Zaid is a 4th grader who has big basketball dreams. He is a little small for his age and very thin. So he has some challenges reaching his goals, but a really loving, supporting family. He even though this is a sports-related series, it's really a way for me to sneak in writing about all the other things I love to write about, like friendship and family and culture. So unlike some of the other sports books that I've seen that are very, very sports-heavy, hopefully there's a good balance for people who love sports but also love reading about other stuff too. So hopefully you guys will enjoy it, and we look forward to talking about our books a little bit. And Karina came up with a really great idea for our conversation today, so you just don't have to listen to us speaking at you the whole time. So I'll let her tell you about what she came up with.
Okay, so has anyone played that game before, 2 Truths and a Lie? Yes, okay. So we thought it might be fun to come up with some truths and lies about ourselves and our books, and to see if anyone can guess what is the lie in these different sets of things that we've come up with. So do you want to go first?
Sure, and
Okay.
I'll say that it's very appropriate because in this book, Zaid gets in trouble for actually telling a lie, and gets grounded, and which keeps him away from his true love, basketballs, and that's one of the challenges he has to overcome. So I thought it was very fitting that we're playing this game. But these are my first set of 3. The opening scene of the book, where Zaid Salim falls off a stage while playing the violin, is based on that very thing happening to my husband. Number 2, every single name in the series is inspired by real-life people I know or people who are connected to my life in some way, including the junior mayor of Gaithersburg. And number 3, the series is set in San Francisco, California, and Zaid is a huge Golden State Warriors fan and adores Steph Curry.
That's hard.
Any guesses on which one is a lie? Somebody who does not know the answer and has not read the book? Any guesses? Who thinks it's number 1? The lie being number 1. Okay.
Yeah, we have a taker over there.
We have 1 for number 1. Who thinks number 2 is the lie? Okay. The name's not being real. And number 3, the setting? All right. So some of you maybe have read the description. So you are all correct. The series, I was really happy to set the series here in Maryland, being a very, very native person to Maryland. I was born and raised right next door and have lived here all my life. So it was very fun to write a book series set here. And Zaid is actually a huge Washington Wizards fan, and he adores John Wall, who is his idol, and kind of set him up for disappointment, unfortunately. But hopefully, in the life of the series, the Wizards will come around and win a championship. So that is the lie. But the opening scene of the book where he falls off the stage did in fact happen to my husband, who's sitting right over there. One of the stories that I heard over and over and over again. So kids, those of you who have stories that your parents repeat so often that you know the punchline and you know everything about it, they might come in handy someday when you're looking for a funny scene to open up a book. And the names in the book, yes, are all based on real people, including our new junior mayor, Zaid Salahuddin, who's sitting right up here. So he was the inspiration for the name Zaid in the series. The last name, Salim, is my husband's last name, and my kid's last name. I didn't change my name. And Adam, who's sitting right up here, is Zaid's best friend in the book. So lots of local people whose names are in here. Everyone is inspired by somebody in my life.
So are you related to the junior mayor?
I am not, only through friendship.
Uh-huh.
But I feel like we're related. We're like
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, like
We're related by love.
simpatico.
Yeah, some relatives you choose, right? Yeah.
I have some of them in the audience too.
Yeah.
So did you ever play the violin?
I did not. I didn't actually play any musical instruments when I was growing up, but I always wished I did, and that's why Amina's voice has so much to do with music, because I think it channels my wishing I had and wishing I could sing, and I have musical children, which is nice to see.
So what about sports? Was that something big when you were growing up, or do your boys play sports, or how do you know so much about basketball?
Basketball, well, I'll defer to that because that's one of my questions, so it'll come up. But yeah, basketball is a big part of our lives, for sure.
Okay, my turn. Okay, so this is my set of 2 truths and a lie. So the first one is, the Beakers of 141st Street features a biracial family of 5 kids who live in Harlem. Number 2, like the Beakers, I grew up with 4 siblings. And then my third one, like the Beakers, who have 3 pets, which are a dog, a cat, and a rabbit, I also have 3 pets, a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. All right, so who has a guess about which one is a lie? Okay, so the first one features a biracial family of 5 who live in Harlem, which pretty much was, our introduction. So if you thought it was that one, then you weren't paying attention. The second one was, like the Beakers, I grew up with 4 siblings. Anyone think that one is the lie? Okay. And then the last one is about the pets, the dog, a cat, and a rabbit. So if you think I have a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. Okay, I'm gonna take her over there. Okay, so the actual one is the second one. I didn't grow up in a big family, although a lot of people have asked me about that because this book was written with a large family. I only have one older brother, but I think what prompted me to write the Beakers is I always loved the thought of having a big family, and I grew up, I was the very first person in my whole family to be born in America, and when my parents moved here, they they were all new in a new country, and we were very isolated because we were just new here, and we didn't really know anyone, and a lot of life in China, where my family grew up, it was centered around family. So when we moved here, it was pretty much just the four of us, and it was very quiet in our house. And I remember reading books like All of a Kind Family and The Saturdays, which featured really large families living in small spaces, and I just loved the idea of that. And I grew up in California, so just thinking about like, oh my gosh, like people live in New York City and they have like this big bustling life and it's so exciting. And I really wanted that. And then when I grew older, I loved the Babysitters Club books. I don't know if anyone has read those, but I thought they were amazing. And actually, it was the first book I saw an Asian American character in, and that meant a lot to me as an Asian American, seeing myself reflected in some way in children's literature. And there was this one character, Stacy. I don't know if you remember her, but she was like the New Yorker, and it just made like New York seem so fabulous and exciting. And so it was because of books I wanted to move to New York and sort of just have a life in New York. And then I'm raising my two kids in Harlem, and a lot of the setting in this book is based on our experiences in Harlem. So we talk a lot about neighbors and community, and a lot of people say to me, like, that doesn't sound like Harlem or New York, like that's not true. And it actually, I mean, it's really based on our experiences there. Like my kids are growing up in a building where they know pretty much everyone, and it's like amazing to trick or treat in our building, even though it's not outside. We go in our building and they know everyone, and they know who gives out the good candy, and it's nice. And our superintendent, they have like this ongoing game of tag that's gone on for years, and that's just the kind of community we live in, and I wanted to see that reflected in this book. And finally, like the Beakers, I do have 3 pets. We live in a tiny, tiny apartment. It's like 700 square feet. And so it's me and my husband and my 2 kids and our 3 pets, a dog, a cat, and a rabbit. And on Instagram, they're famous, the rabbit in particular. So if you want to see them, you can go on Instagram and check them out.
One thing, I really enjoyed her book, and it took me back to my childhood and the types of books I really love to read. And one of the things I appreciated was the fact that you were able to capture 5 personalities so well in the kids. So who are those people? Are they totally made up, or are they inspired by real people?
Okay, so some of them were inspired by real people. So my daughters inspired parts of the characters. So my youngest daughter, she is exactly like Lainey. So when I started writing Beakers, my youngest daughter was about 4 3/4, which is the exact age of the youngest one in this book. And they have almost identical personalities. And then there's one boy in the family, and his name is Oliver, and actually his mom is in the audience. That's one of my best friends, Katie. We've known each other since college, and her son is about the same age as my older daughter. And I just love that name, Oliver, and it just reminded me of him and how wonderful he is. So it was really fun to incorporate that in the book. And actually, my other friend Harrigan, who's back there also, I named the Auntie Harrigan in this book after her because she's like the fun auntie. You know, like everyone has like the fun auntie and the fun uncle. So she's like the fun auntie in, like with my girls, they like love her so much and are like, yay, Auntie Harrigan. So I had to put her in this book. And I did ask permission to like use her.
I never asked permission.
Is that okay with you? Like to use her? Okay. All right, so there you go.
Oh,
He won't sue you.
Good. It is so fun to be able to build people who are important into your stories, and little things like I was just on tour for this book a couple weeks ago, and I was mentioning how the uncle character in this book has been inspired by really a composite of the different uncles that have been a big part of my kids' lives, and the nickname that the uncle character gives Zaid in the story is Skeletor. For those of you who are too young to know who Skeletor is, he was the villain in a popular cartoon called He-Man that I grew up watching. And Cheyenne, sitting over here, the mayor's father, now he'll be known as the mayor's father, I think, he called my younger son, who is very skinny as well, and partly why Zaid is skinny, Skeletor as his nickname. So that's where that came from. So it is fun to steal from people that we love, but I actually didn't ask you either. Hope it's okay.
I love the uncle in that book, by the way.
Oh, thank
I
you. Thanks. All right, should we go to the next three? All right, my number one. I really wanted to write this book because I was a starter on my high school girls basketball team and have had a lifelong passion for basketball. Number two, in the book, Zaid's grandfather talks about a sport called Kabaddi, which is a mix of rugby, dodgeball, and ring around the rosy, where players sometimes wear nothing but giant underpants and grease up their bodies. And number three, I am related to the world-famous cricket player Imran Khan, who led the Pakistani national team to win the World Cup cricket match, or tournament, and who is now a politician who wants to lead the country of Pakistan. So who thinks number one is the lie, that I played basketball for my high school team? Okay. Who thinks number two, the sport of Kabaddi, is the lie? And who thinks number three, that I'm related to Imran Khan, is the lie? All right. Well, that is actually true. I am related to Imran Khan through my mom, who I don't remember the relation. You can ask my husband. I always forget what it is, but he's my mom's nephew, kind of, through a cousin. And there's lots. I think there's like 2 ways we're related, so I don't know. But yeah, that's true. And Kabaddi is a real sport that is played in Pakistan, yes. And you actually, the funniest thing, when my husband first told me about this game, I thought it was a joke, too, because he said that the players actually say, Kabaddi, 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 while they're playing the game, which, I've never heard of a sport where you actually do that. But it's a real sport. And I actually watched video of it. These players were wearing clothing, like regular sports apparel, but it's sort of like you at one point are holding hands with your teammates and trying to form this unbreakable line, and other people are trying to break through, and you like throw yourself at each other. And is there even a ball involved? Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a ball or if it's all like just throwing your. Yeah, it's really interesting. So you can look up Kabaddi on YouTube. It's very entertaining. So sometimes, players would just wear kind of like a sumo wrestler, like a big, diaper type, pants, and grease themselves up so that it'd be harder to tackle you.
So have you played this game? Oh, okay. And is that photographic evidence?
It might be an Olympic sport. Let's all vote for that. I want to see this. Yeah.
I can't imagine why they would. I mean, that's...
All right, official sport of Gaithesburg. Thank you, Mayor. Well, what was really fun about writing this book is that to be able to put in like funny cultural stuff. So Zaid is, he's an American kid. He's a third-generation Pakistani American boy. So he's a little further removed from the culture than even I was growing up, the child of immigrants. So it's fun to explore from the same perspective that my children have, the relationship to the culture, and that they're a little bit more removed. They get a big kick out of it. They love certain things like the food and dressing up in traditional clothes and celebrating, weddings and other events. But then also things like learning about, sports like Kabaddi, or watching dramas, which are like soap operas that come from the subcontinent with my with my mother, and finding them completely absurd. So that was a fun thing to explore in the series. But it was not at all inspired by my basketball playing abilities. I did not play basketball in high school. I did play field hockey, another less known sport like Kabaddi. The basketball stuff all came from my husband and my two boys, who are basketball obsessed, like the character, and were great fact checkers for me, and great for giving me plays and drills and everything else, and making sure it's accurate. So that's where that came from.
So when did you know you wanted to write a sports story? Was it always, or?
I think when I wanted to write a chapter book with a male main character, having two boys and wanting to see more books for boys, this book I hope is not just for boys, but knowing that boys are maybe a little more hesitant to pick up a book sometimes with a girl main character. So I wanted, and I've heard librarians talk about that, so I definitely wanted to write something with a boy main character. And then I thought, because I do live and breathe basketball, that it would be a nice thing to tie in. I know so many people are so passionate about sports, but like I said, I wanted to kind of use that as a vehicle to write about a lot of other things too. So that's where that came from.
Love it. All right. So my next set is number 1. One way the Beakers tried to convince their landlord to leave them alone is by buying him a one-way ticket to Australia. Number 2, the Beakers of 141st Street is about the importance of family and community, with lots of shenanigans along the way. And number 3, there are currently 3 books planned in the Beakers series. So who thinks the first one is a lie, the Australia one-way trip? Okay, we've got some takers. And the second one, it's about the importance of family community, which no one should raise their hand there. And there are currently 3 books planned in the series. Okay, a couple people. Okay, so the first one is the lie. I'm just going to give that plot point away. They do not have enough money to fly him to Australia. What I liked about writing this book is writing about kids trying to do something with not a lot of resources, which I think the best middle grade books are really looking at the ingenuity of kids and how creative they can be in trying to get their way, right? And I also had to think about how to do that with kids that don't have, their dad has 2 jobs. So one of his jobs is that he's the super in the brownstone apartment, which is pretty common in Harlem, that one of the residents will sort of take on the daily duties of what a building super would do, like take out the trash and sweep the sidewalk and the stairs and just basic low maintenance kind of maintenance things. And so they're just a very middle class family. And there are 3 books planned in the Beakers series. So what ended up happening is when my publisher bought this book, they bought 2 books, which is a lot of publishers do that just to sort of ensure that if they have a book by someone that they like, that they'll get another one from that person, and that person's not going to jump ship and go to a different publisher. So they bought 2 books, and when I talked to my editor, she said that she wasn't sure if she wanted a sequel, that, and she asked what I was working on now, and I had told her at that point it was a different book, and she said, great, run with it, and your deadline is in 10 months. And I was like, great, no problem, because I already started it, and I was like, okay, I can do this. I can meet that deadline. We were talking about deadlines earlier. And then about 6 months later, I got an email from her, and she said, actually, we do want another Beakers book in addition to this other book. And I said, great, that's so exciting, thank you. And she said, okay, and now it's due at the same time your second book was due, so you actually only have 3 months to do it. And I was like, what? That's not great. And so I pretty much neglected my kids for the next half a year trying to write the second book, which is coming out in September. And it's called The Beakers in the Hidden Garden. And before even the first book came out, they emailed me again and said, okay, remember that other book we wanted to write? Can you put that aside again, because we want another Beakers book. So I have another one coming out hopefully next year if we can meet all the deadlines. And that's publishing for you. It's really so fun.
So for me, when this is my first series that I envisioned as a series. I did write a picture book called Golden Domes and Silver Lanterns, which is a book of colors. And then when we decided to do a follow-up book, which is shapes, I was like, oh man, why did I use that? In book 1, I wish I had saved it. If I knew there was going to be a book 2, I wouldn't have used this object, because it would have made a great shape instead of a color. Did you find that in your story? If you envisioned this as a standalone and then had to make it a series, is it hard to do, or is each one a very different story with the same cast?
So what ended up happening was when they asked for the second book, it was like sort of in the final stages of this book being done. So then I went back and I just added little references in this book so I would have something to work with on the second book, because pretty much this was tied up. And I had written the ending like a billion times. I have like a million drafts of the last chapter. And so I had to change everything a little bit to accommodate a second one. And then with the second book, I was a lot smarter, and I just put in things that I could probably use in another book just in case. And I did that same thing with the third book, just in case they want another book. But it is still tied up in case they just want the 3. Yeah, and that's publishing again.
Yeah, seriously. So I was ordered by my husband to make sure that the series had an ending that would satisfy his inner 10-year-old. So hopefully it does, but I hope I left enough open where I can extend the series too. All right, my third and final set. Number 1, there's a big emphasis on family in this series and on various relationships. And in the Urdu language, there are several different words for aunt, uncle, nephew, and other relatives' names. Many ways to say the same word. Number 2, food is a huge part of Pakistani culture, and Pakistanis love Chinese food. My family went out to eat Chinese food for special occasions, just like Zaid's. And number 3, in the book, one of the themes is following your dreams, and Zaid's parents want him to play the violin, and he wants to play basketball. And this theme was inspired by my parents wanting me to be a doctor instead of a writer. So who thinks, number 1, the Urdu language and the multiple words for the same relationship is the lie? All right, you guys are smart. Number 2, who thinks that Pakistanis do not have this special affinity for Chinese food? Okay. And who thinks number 3 is the lie, that the theme was not inspired by my parents wanting me to be the doctor? Okay. Well, so Chinese food is actually a huge Pakistani favorite, I think because Pakistan and China are neighbors. And Chinese food in Pakistan is actually very delicious and very different from here. It's sort of taken on a fusion aspect. So some might argue that it's even tastier than what you find in America. But yeah, my family was a huge Chinese food was our go-to when we went out, and for Zaid's family as well. That's why I put it in there, because and especially the fortune cookie ritual is always a fun part. And in the Urdu language, there is a specific name for every family member. So if it's your mother's sister, it's one different word for aunt versus your father's sister or your sister-in-law on either side would be different. Your grandparents from each parent have different names, which was fun to use in the story too. So it's very, very specific. You always know who people are talking about versus English, where you just say aunt and it's like aunt who what. But in Urdu, you just know right away who you're talking about. And the third one is the lie. Thankfully, my parents did not push me to being a doctor, even though I am South Asian, and that is a very common thing that parents do. I think they realized early on that I was far too squeamish and not interested really in the sciences, and I was always leaning towards writing and anything verbal. So thankfully, they recognized that and did encourage me. They would have loved it if I was a lawyer like Ellen. I didn't end up going that route, but they thankfully did support my dreams, and that's something I wanted Zaid's parents to do as well. So hopefully they will come around in the story and support his basketball dreams. You'll have to read the book and find out if they do.
Okay, so I have a question. So in Chinese culture, we have the same thing with the relatives. Like everyone has a specific name, and whenever I go to China and meet my relatives, they will spend hours talking about like what the relationship is and like what exactly like what that specific name is. Like, oh, that's your great aunt who's married to like someone's brother, and that makes you this. And then they're like, no, that's not the name. Like, it's this. Like, do you do that too?
Yeah, and that's why I couldn't explain the relationship between me and Imran Khan, because it's so confusing.
Yeah.
And my mom always says it in Urdu, and will use the specific relationships that I don't know the translation of. So that's why I've just sort of given up, and I'm like, well, he's in my family. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I just find it so fascinating that it's just like a really big deal that you get like that right. But then no one knows what it is because they're just arguing about it. Like, what is it? My other question is about the Chinese food. So in my family, like Thanksgiving, American Thanksgiving was like such abomination. Like the actual food, like the turkey and like the, all the fixings, they just thought it was so terrible. And we would always go to Chinese restaurants for Thanksgiving because that was like the only place that was open. Do you ever, what was your family like with like American holidays and food and
Yeah, so well, Chinese food was definitely a favorite. Like if we were going to eat non-Pakistani food, our go-tos were Chinese or Pizza Hut. Those were really the only two options. So
Italian.
So I never knew there were all these other cuisines until I was much older. I was like, oh, Thai food, Vietnamese, like delicious. So yeah, sushi not until I was maybe in my 20s. But yeah, luckily Thanksgiving, which actually is a family favorite holiday of ours, we had Pakistani friends who very much embraced Thanksgiving feast in a traditional way, and so we had the turkey and the trimmings, and it became a tradition for us because of that. I think they secretly grumbled about the food, that it was bland and they want spice or like some masala on the side, but this family was very strict about Thanksgiving norms, so now it's become a tradition. But my in-laws, on the other hand, will have nothing to do with it. They're like, this has no taste, so, which is a quote. So, yeah.
Direct quote. All right, this is my last set. Okay, number 1, The Beakers at 141st Street is my first published book. Number 2, it took me 28 days to write my first draft of The Beakers. And number 3, I do all of my writing in a beautiful writing room overlooking the East River. And it's completely clean, and there are no pets in there, and no one ever disturbs me. Okay, so number 1, this book is my first published book. Okay, yeah, so that is true. It took me 28 days to write my first draft. Liar. Okay, and then the last one is the writing room. Yeah, okay. So, so I think it's so interesting because when I go around and visit schools and talk to kids, they are very interested in where I do my writing. And a lot of my visits are Skype visits. Do you also do Skype visits? Yeah, which are really fun and a great way for us to meet students without having to travel. So if you know of anyone that would like to speak with us, but it's not possible for us to get to you, Skype visits are always really great alternatives. So whenever I do a Skype visit, I always show them my living room, which is like the size of this table back here. And they're just like so amazed because I think a lot of people think that writers generally have like space to do writing. And I actually wrote this book in a coffee shop when my daughter Lena was going to preschool for 3 hours, like twice a week. And I would like run to the coffee shop, and it had like this really questionable basement. And I would go in there, and no one else would be there because it was questionable. And it had this weird smell, too, but I would always go there because there was space. And no one would be like, why are you only drinking like this small cup of tea for 5 hours and not buying anything else from the coffee shop? So I would go there, and I did a lot of writing there. And then I also do a lot of writing in my apartment. And whenever I do these Skype visits, the kids will see like a cat going across the screen because I have this cat that like thinks that the computer is her personal bed. And so she'll just like sit down, or like the tail will be like flicking in my face, and I'll be like, yeah, and then my book. So that's a myth that we all do our writing in these magical, beautiful places. Where do you do your writing?
Mostly on my kitchen table. I
Yeah.
have a designated office, but it's so dirty and full of junk that I don't want to be in there ever. So that's a goal, to get my office in the shape that I actually want to be in it. But yeah, mostly my kitchen table.
Yeah.
And then I get to watch my kids, their shows. So they're watching like reruns of Fresh Prince in the background. And then I'm like, I think I might be channeling Uncle Phil when I'm writing, some of the dialogue. But it's all good. It keeps it interesting.
Right, it definitely keeps it interesting. The other thing I wanted to bring up, especially because some of you might be trying to write or are writers, or you're students who are thinking about writing, this challenge that I did in November, when I did this book 4 years ago, I did something called National Novel Writing Month, and it's this really cool program where people all over the world can do it. And you go onto the website, which is nanowrimo.org, and you sign up, and in November, all these people start trying to write a novel. And a novel is considered about 50,000 words. And I started it, and it was actually a really cool experience, because I think as writers, sometimes we might get stuck in terms of like maybe looking at the blank page and not knowing what to write next, or feeling like you have writer's block, which my daughters always say like they have writer's block, and I'm like, you're too young to have writer's block. But with NaNoWriMo, basically you're just writing as fast as you can, and you try to get to 50,000 words within that month. And it's a lot of words. So this book is not even 50,000 words. It is like 47,000 words. And one of the tricks is that you don't delete anything that you write. You just write, and even if you know you're writing something terrible, like sometimes I would get to this point where I knew I needed like a couple hundred more words to meet that word count goal. I'd just be like, this is so terrible, I can't believe I'm writing this. I'm just trying to get my word count, and just counted that as my words, and just whatever, it's fine. Another writer, I don't know if you know Rachel Vales. She's written a ton of middle grade books, but she does this thing with her writing partner where they call it 5 before 5 or 5. So they try to write 5 pages before 5 p.m., or they have to donate $5 to an organization that they don't like. So so it's like all these things that writers do to just like get words down, because I think sometimes it can be really difficult when we're writing and we don't know really where we're going. And sometimes the best things can come out of those sessions if you just like push yourself to write something. And so I asked Rachel, like, what organizations did you donate to? And she's like, well, it has to be something you really, really, really hate, like super hate. And it was around the elections. And she's like, I'm not going to say anything, but like, I really hate this person, and he has like terrible hair. And we're like, okay, you don't have to say anything else. So that's another good tip. What do you do
helpful.
when you are drafting? Do you? When you get
I need these tips, so I think I might do this 5. Yeah,
we can do that together.
And if I have someone to be accountable to, because that's my, and I dreamt of being one of those disciplined writers who gets up in the morning and whips off a few thousand words
Their
before coffee. Yeah, it's not me. I'm like writing at all weird hours, and go a few days without writing, and then go days where I am writing. It's not good. So and I know it's hard, and I know for those of you out there, I mean, I meet so many people who say, I've always wanted to write, or, oh, that's so cool that you get to do that. I have so many ideas, and I just tell them, just do it. It's painful. The first draft is painful. It's really painful for me, but you'll never know unless you actually just write it and get it out of your head. So I still struggle, and I'm looking for tips all the time. So those are good, and I'm gonna try it. So okay, we have 5 minutes left. So if you guys have any questions or comments on anything we've talked about, it'd be great. You can use that time. Adam, yes. You've been reading Power Forward? Thank you.
It's like the best book ever, right?
Awesome. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So the question is whether Amina's friends are based off of real people. So yes, actually Soo Jin, who is Amina's best friend in the story, a Korean American girl, is based off of my best friend when I was in elementary school. And my friend actually did change her name to something else when she became, thank you.
So this is the
Thank
book
you.
that they were talking about.
When her family became American citizens, and that was sort of the spark for the whole book. Emily was sort of a composition of other people, not any one person, but a few people in my life. So definitely. There's a hand in the way back.
How did I write a book in 10 months? Well, like I said, I neglected my children, so they are still okay, but still bring that up whenever they're upset with me. Like, remember that time when you were writing and you couldn't do this thing for me? I think writing is really hard, but one of the things that I really love about our children's book community is that we have a lot of people that are in the same boat. So whenever I was feeling like very upset or frustrated or feeling like I couldn't do this, it was nice to talk to other people about their experiences. Hena and I were talking a lot about deadlines and how hard they are. And I was at a picture book presentation at the tent over there earlier, and like the writer was basically like, I don't even think about my deadlines. I'm on my own deadline. And I was like, that's such a good attitude because I'm always concerned about the deadlines. And Hena and I were saying, like, even as students and stuff, like, we never even thought to like ask a teacher if they could extend a deadline for us. And actually, I just asked for my first extension a few months ago, and it felt awful. Like,
Same.
I felt like
Same.
I was disappointing like the whole world. But no one really cares. They're like, all right, it's fine. Yeah.
But I would say practice. Set if you can. If you are a deadline-oriented person, like, it does help me to set goals. Like, okay, by the end of this month, I'll hit this word count. And for me, like, daily word counts are too restrictive, or have been. Right now, I need to, so I will do the $5 thing. Yeah. But I think having goals for yourself. I think having a writing partner really helps too. I don't know if that was something you used, but for me, writing my first draft of Amina's Voice, I wrote in 3 months. And it was really because I had a writing partner who I knew was waiting for my chapters. So that can be helpful too, to motivate.
Yeah, and you should look at National Novel Writing Month because it's open to everyone of all ages. And it's really fun to just write as fast as you can and not worry about grammar or spelling or whether it even makes sense. And sometimes even in that period, you might get an idea for something else that might be a different story, or maybe the thing that you wrote is like 10 different stories. Like, you just never know what comes out when you just give yourself that time to just write without thinking too hard. Yeah. Yes.
What do you think both of your kids feel about
Think about what?
What do you think both your kids feel about?
Okay, so the question is, what do our kids think about us being writers?
Well, I have 2 teenage boys, so I think their answer would be, "It's cool," and that's about it. But yeah, I think they're secretly proud of their mom, and I think they like that. They see themselves in the books. I think they know that they were the inspiration for it. For me, really, not having had books that reflected me. And my experience when I was growing up was what made me want to create those books for my kids and their friends and for everyone else. So I think they know that. They don't say it too often, but no, they're great and they're super supportive. So I think they know that they're a part of it, and they're not just the inspiration, but they've actually helped me edit and review everything I write. So they're great.
Yeah, so my 2 kids, they're 8 and 10, and I think they thought that they had written the book, like they were actually the authors. So that's interesting. And when I read them, the Vanderbeekers, I read it to them when it was in the galley format, so that's like the paperback copy that they give their reviewers. So I read it to them then, and I literally could not get through a paragraph with them saying, "Oh, that's me, right? Like, that's inspired by me." And I'm like, I do have some original ideas, like, so not everything is about you, but they're really great, and they're, I feel like, well, don't tell them, but I feel like they should be paid for their publicity work because they're like really great. They'll just go up to people on the subway and be like, "Have you seen my mom's book?" And I'm like, "Here's $1."
My son, I remember my older son, he was maybe 8 when my first book came out, my first picture book, and he thought I was famous, right away. No one knew who I was at all, ever, but I think it was through a class of his, we used to take music lessons right here at Victor Litz, and so it was either that or somewhere else that we saw a familiar face in a different place. And I said to the woman, "I think I know you." And she was like, "Yeah, you look really familiar." And then my son says, "Yeah, you probably know my mom because she's an author." And the woman was like,
"World
no,
famous."
No. So yeah, it was cute how they think that. Well, they own your experience somewhat. So yeah, it's cute.
We had one last question. Yeah. So it's gonna sound really hokey, but the name came in a dream. I don't know how to explain that. So like right before National Novel Writing Month, I had like committed to doing this program, and I started to really stress out. And my husband was like, he had no faith in me. He was like, "You shouldn't even do it. Like, you've got a lot going on." I had like 2 little kids, and I was like, "No, I'm gonna do it, but I don't even know what I'm gonna write about." And then I woke up in the middle of the night, like a few days before National Novel Writing Month, and came up with the first line of this book, and the Beakers was the name. And I'm not sure what I was thinking, because now I have a lot of people asking me about that, and I have no good answer. And I actually have had people like by the name of Vanderbeek like email me and ask. And
So is it a real name or made up?
well, it's made up to me, but the real people have that. Yeah, and they want to know why. So maybe we should come up with like a good answer for me to give.
Okay, thank you guys so much. If you have any other questions, we'll be right next door, I think.